It was, he says, no accident. Sir Brian Longstaff's damning verdict on the infected blood scandal is that doctors, the NHS and successive governments betrayed patients and shattered lives. And adding scandal upon scandal, he also found the truth about the disaster had been deliberately hidden for decades. Published today, his 2,500-page report details a terrible tragedy, the scale of which, he says, is horrifying. More than 30,000 people were infected with deadly viruses through contaminated blood and blood products. Warnings were ignored, patient safety was neglected, and too many lives have been lost waiting for this day. A day of shame, the Prime Minister called it tonight, as he issued an apology to victims. Yet, as Sir Brian's 6-year-long inquiry closes, he has stressed the disaster itself is still ongoing.
The scale is horrifying. 30,000 NHS patients infected with HIV and hepatitis C in the 70s and 80s. More than 3,000 men, women and children have so far died. For decades they faced silence and denials. Today they finally got the truth loud and clear. A standing ovation for the man who delivered it.
This disaster was not an accident. People put their faith in doctors and in the government to keep them safe, and their trust was betrayed.
Good morning, son. Merry Christmas to you. All right?
Getting a stomachache.
Fella?
Stomachache.
You got a stomachache?
People like Lee and his parents. Just weeks after this, Lee died. He was just 10 years old.
I couldn't get to sleep. Sun was here. It makes you full.
He'd been infected with HIV from a product called Factor VIII, used to treat his haemophilia. Imported from the US, it was made using blood from paid donors at high risk of infection, drug users and prisoners.
He used to say he was frightened. The pain was so much for him. He was in so much pain near the end. For the last few years, I think it was too hard for him. And a child shouldn't have to go through what he went through.
The report says a catalogue of failures led to the disaster. The UK Blood Service failed to screen blood donors, even though the risk of hepatitis was known about since the end of World War II. Imported blood products were unsafe and should not have been licensed in the UK. Doctors treated patients despite the known risks and without informing them of the risks. They failed to adjust patients' treatment when safer options were available. By mid-1982, the risk of AIDS was apparent, but the UK government failed to take steps to address that risk. Patients, including children, were used in medical trials without their knowledge or informed consent. And patients sometimes weren't told they were infected for years. We showed Lee Turton's parents the findings.
I'm just so angry. It's what I expected to read, but actually seeing it is just so hard to read it. It's time now for people to be held accountable, and criminal charges need to be brought for what they've done. And he should still be here. And all you can remember is the pain and what he suffered.
The report says the level of suffering is difficult to comprehend, compounded by the reaction of successive governments, the NHS and the medical profession. Over the decades, documents deliberately destroyed, a subtle, pervasive and chilling cover-up.
It's a totally vindicating day. We've been pushing for this as a community for decades, personally for 10 years, 1 decade, and to see all of that fight not only come to a result that we've been wanting, but to actually put us in a position where we wake up tomorrow for the first time in decades feeling like we don't have to fight for the truth anymore.
The report says the chief responsibility for these failings lies with successive governments.
This is a day of shame for the British state. Today's report shows a decades-long moral failure at the heart of our national life. Today I want to speak directly to the victims and their families, some of whom are with us in the gallery. I want to make a wholehearted and unequivocal apology for this terrible injustice.
Now is the time, finally, for national recognition of this disaster, for proper compensation, and for vindication for all those who have been so terribly wronged.
A memorial service was held this afternoon. The report says for the government apology to be meaningful, it must be accompanied by action. Rebecca Barry, News at 10.